Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to be here this day and to have the opportunity to speak with you. For 25 years to 26, I live in California, so I was not too far from here. Had a wonderful opportunity of teaching and building schools, building charter schools in South Los Angeles. Majority of my students were from Mexico, so I have some affinity to this country. Unfortunately, I never came here because I didn't have to come. I met them there, and we have a nice time together. So I was not visiting Mexico, and it's exciting to be here, and you have been a wonderful host, and we are very grateful to the leaders who accepted to host us and have hosted us very well. Going to Ghana and seeing the education system, a number of times people ask me, why did you come? After all those years in America, why did you choose to come back to Ghana? And invariably, they expect me to list the litany of challenges that the education system is facing as compared to that of the US. And I always tell them that I don't see problems in Ghana. I see opportunities everywhere in the education sector. I see the opportunity to bring about transformation. Had a wonderful opportunity of visiting England and visiting some very important places. And I remember about a month ago when we visited, and we went to Westminster Abbey and saw all the great statues. And I said to my colleagues who were with me that I'd rather be African. And he said, why? And I said, look at all the statues, all the famous people. If I grow up here, if I do big things here, I would never have a statue erected in my honor. All the statues have already been erected in the honor of many people. That is to underscore that there's a wonderful opportunity to make a difference in Africa. And in Ghana in particular, we have had a wonderful opportunity of having a president who's so much committed to education. In fact, the platform that he used to win the elections, and if you ask people in Ghana why they voted for him almost 2 years ago, they will tell you it was because of his promise of free senior high school. A major education reform that people thought would never happen in their lifetime. Because for 60 years, after 60 years of independence, high school was reserved for those who could afford. So after junior high school, if your parents could not pay, you're on your own. And the system will say bye-bye to you. You have to find something to do. So we have very high unemployment rates. We have people who are disillusioned because the system had left them behind. And we decided 2 years ago that something different had to happen. And the president, using domestic resources, has been able to send so many children to senior high school. In fact, within 2 years, we have increased secondary enrollment by close to 55%. Now, any child growing up in Ghana after you finish junior high school has the opportunity to go to secondary school. And the interesting thing about it is that 60% of the students go to boarding schools, publicly funded boarding schools. And they don't have to pay $1, they don't have to pay a dime. You go to boarding school, you eat 3 times a day, and if you happen to be a day student, you are given free lunch. And that is how we are running secondary education in Ghana at this point. It's a major initiative as we talk about balanced and inclusive education. A system that had failed the poor and relegated the poor to the background for too long has now been changed. And it has been changed in tandem with what was taking place at the basic education level, where basic education since 1992 has been free and compulsory. And therefore, we have seen growth in enrollment numbers at all levels. And also, Ghana is unique in the sense that we guarantee 2 years of kindergarten education. So preschool is covered, KG is covered, and then you go all the way and up to junior high school. And now we've added senior high school, guaranteeing 14 years of pre-university education for every child in the country. Now, beyond that, there are a number of things that has taken place. And I think just to give you a feel of how the classroom look like, and then in case you don't know where Ghana is, you can see it from here. It's the red. It's West Africa. And I know when I was in the US, some people ask me, is that close to Jamaica? And I say, yes, it's close to Jamaica. So this is where Ghana is. And we have a population of 30 million. And we have a youthful population. So 38% of them are students from kindergarten to senior high school. 38% of the population are students. And we have recently approved a 12-year education strategic plan, which is driving the change that we are seeing in the country. Now, as I told you earlier, we have 2 years of pre-primary or kindergarten, 6 years of primary, 3 years of junior high, and 3 years of senior high. And then you can move on to go to the polytechnic or technical university, or you can go to the regular university where you can do a diploma or do a degree, and then continue on to a PhD level. Now, the challenges that we had, first of all, was access issue. That not everybody was getting access, and it had to be changed. Now, the moment you do access, you also have to worry about quality. So immediately, as part of this reform, the government began a major education reform initiative in the country. First of all, beginning with teacher education. Until now, all that you needed was 2 years of post-high school education, and you could be a teacher in Ghana. And no wonder our outcomes was not as good as it ought to be. And also, you see, one of the things I saw going back was that we were caught up in a certain trap. And that trap was, you are better than most countries in Africa, so do you think you have a problem? Because if you look at gross tertiary enrollment ratio, the African average is 7%, and Ghana is 17%. So people sit there complacent thinking that we are better than most countries, so what are you worried about? And as a result, there was no sense of urgency saying that, no, we need to do better. I remember I went to an event sponsored by USAID, and the head of USAID in Ghana was saying that Ghana is going to be the powerhouse for education in Africa. And when it was my turn to speak, I told him, no, Ghana is not going to be a powerhouse for education in Africa. Ghana is going to be a powerhouse for education in the world. Because when we became independent around the same time as South Korea, South Korea has 96.3 gross tertiary enrollment ratio. That is, if you take the youth between 18 and 23. Their gross tertiary enrollment ratio is around over 90%. And in 1960, Ghana's per capita income was higher than South Korea. So if we've squandered 60 years, we're not going to squander the next 60 years talking about being the best in Africa with all due respect. We think we need to be like anybody else in the world and not box ourselves into the African trap and say to ourselves, because we have 17% and the African average is 7%, we need not do more. So our goal is very simple. A sense of urgency has been created in the country. We think we've squandered 60 years of great opportunity bequeathed to us by the founders of the nation. And this is the time that we need to wake up and smell the coffee and not compare ourselves to other countries and feel good about ourselves and say to ourselves, because we are better than this country, we need not do more. We believe we have an opportunity to do great things in Ghana, and we have a president who has made education the centerpiece of his transformation agenda, and that is what we are pursuing in Ghana. So when you come to Ghana, you're going to hear people talk about free senior high school everywhere. Because for the first time, the poor is going to secondary schools. And the interesting thing that was going on in the country was that when you are at the basic level, you don't see the rich folks' children in public schools. The elite of the country will send their children to private schools at the basic level. And because you enter senior high school with an examination, their children will do so well on the exams that then they jump into the public school system and they take the top tier of all the public schools and the government funds them. And then the poor are cut off. Actually, there was a cutoff that says if you got a certain aggregate, you could not go to a public senior high school. So the worst thing that happened was when you see the poor, whose children were in the public schools at the basic level and didn't do well, having to borrow money to send their children to private schools, and the rich jumping ahead of them. So we introduced an affirmative action that said, we are reserving 30% of all seats at the top tier schools, high schools across the country, to students from public schools. So there were some schools that were so elitist, and you could only find 5% of their population from rural areas, from the countryside. And today, if you go there, you find about 28 to 30% of their students coming from disadvantaged backgrounds and coming from rural backgrounds and coming from inner city backgrounds. And that is something that we felt needed to be done so that we can stem the tide and put the poor in a very good position. And then we knew that the elite was going to cry foul and say, hey, they are coming, and they are going to lower performance. So the government came up with an intervention grant. And these are monies that follow the students. And with the intervention grant, every school has money to provide intervention support for all the students so that those who may not have come there with all the skill sets will not be told to sink or swim. They will be given an opportunity to participate just like anybody else. So we took a look at the quality issue after access was granted, and in fact, we even had to do year-round schools this year. And the interesting thing was, I got my first job in California because in 1994, the schools were going year-round because of the large influx of immigrants, and also the fact that high school had been changed from 3 to 4 years. So in 1994, I was hired to teach in Los Angeles because they needed more teachers. Because their schools were a 3-year high school system, they changed to 4 years, and they decided not to, at that point, they didn't have money to build more schools, but they hired more teachers. They did the schedule in such a way that the schools could accommodate more students with the same facilities. So when we saw the growth in enrollment, I ran to my minister and said, Minister, we're in trouble. But it's a good problem to have because we are projecting a 30% increase over last year's student enrollment, and the only way out is if we go year-round. And we went to the president, we briefed him, and for the first time, we introduced year-round schools in Ghana. And about 70% of our high schools are now going year-round. You see, the whole idea was this. If we were to sit there and talk about facilities, we were not going to educate these children from disadvantaged backgrounds. So since our major focus was making sure that the poor will get education, we also had to look at other systems in the West, look at how California did it in 1994, and take the same idea, implement it in Ghana, and now people love it. We have the green track and the gold track, and parents are excited because we told them, this is the only way we can bring in all the poor who wants to go to senior high school, and the nation accepted it. So since we wanted to do something so good, we thought about how do we do it. If we did not talk about making sure everybody will go, we could have implemented the same cut-off thing, cut off the poor, tell them they don't belong, and get them to go and borrow to go to private schools. So beyond that, we have then embarked on a major curricular reform. The curricular reform that wants to change the way teachers teach and students learn in Ghana. I've done a number of unannounced visits to various schools, and I love it because they don't plan it. So I walk to schools, and I get an opportunity to talk to students, and I've addressed students in assembly halls. They're excited by my background because everybody wants to go to America. So when they know that I was working in the U.S. and operated schools there, the kids are just fascinated. But after I speak for an hour, I'll ask them, any question for me, and no hand will go up. That is when I realized that we have a major problem on our hands. The students have been tamed. They are just waiting to hear everything the teacher will say, they write it down and give it back to the teacher on the day of the exams, and they are the best students in the world. But we know this world, 21st century world, does not operate that way. We need students who are critical thinkers. We need teachers who are mere facilitators and who are not just a sage on stage, that they are the wisest person in the room, and whatever they say is what students have to regurgitate back to them. So we are now embarking on a major reform, focused on how we can change the curricula. And early grades has been done. We are moving on to high school, and we are moving on to create an environment where, in fact, we'll be able to change the way our students learn. But we couldn't have done that by not looking at the curricula at the teacher colleges. Colleges of education used to be 2 years, as I alluded to, with 1 year practicum, and beginning this year, it's now 4 years. So you have to have a minimum of 4-year degree and then plus 1 year practicum before you can teach at the KG level. So we believe that unless we improve the quality, and then for those who are in the system, provide continuous professional development, you will not be able to change the system that we have inherited. So we talk about the relevance of the curriculum, we talk about quality, we've also talked about accountability, and the interesting thing is this. A head teacher of a school, a headmaster of a school, will never be queried by the education authorities if the students fail. There was a zero accountability framework. And I understand that because they were not also trained to become headmasters. There's no formal training program until now for people to head schools. So they come in and nobody tells them anything. When I've walked into schools where even the performance outcomes of the school, the headmaster does not know because he was not held accountable. Now things are changing, and that's why I tell people that what we see in Ghana, what we saw in Ghana 2 years ago was a patchwork of arrangement and not truly what you can say is a system of education. Now we are helping build a system where we have a national assessment so that you can have students in primary 2, primary 4, all the way to 6 going up assessed so that you know whether they are actually getting the numeracy and literacy skills at appropriate levels. That was not happening in the country. And we talk about sustainability. I will spend a few minutes on that. We believe that to do all these things, you need money. So most people will say, how are you going to fund that? And the president made a commitment. He said that he made it clear to the nation that I'm going to use your oil money to train the future generation of Ghanaians. So since we discovered oil and the money was coming, he said, you know what? There's a heritage fund. Part of the oil money is invested automatically for future generations, but the rest that is left, he's pumping everything into education. And therefore, we have not gone to any country to borrow. Free senior high school is being funded through our domestic resources. And we know that we have to actually improve the system capacity. And this is a situation that is probably the same in a number of African countries where you go to the various ministries of education and the capacity to manage a major reform is not there. And I remember when we went to Kenya, this issue came up. African ministers of education were lamenting and said that we don't have capacity. But what I realized going back to Ghana and almost like an outsider looking in was it's not because they don't have the capacity in the country, but they have created a civil service structure that says that the staff in any of the ministry can be transferred at any point in time, which means that you get some young men and women in the Ministry of Education, they work there for 5 years, and the head of civil service come and say, you have been transferred to Ministry of Trade. So we're just simply shooting ourselves in the foot. So it's not a situation where these people were leaving the country. They are there. But they are transferred from the Ministry of Education to Ministry of Trade. A new set of people will come. They have to learn everything afresh. So if you do a major World Bank project or any donor-funded project, the people who work on it do not carry the experience to the next years. And before you realize, when the World Bank is funding you the next time, they are bringing their experts from the various countries to come and tell you what to do, because you decided to ship your people who have the expertise to other ministries. So within the Ministry of Education in Ghana, we met with the civil service My minister made it clear that this is something we need to stop after we came from Kenya. And we are stopping it in Ghana. There's going to be a career track in the Ministry of Education, and those people will rise through the ranks there, and they will not be transferred to other ministries, so that you can keep your experts in your ministry to really develop the capacity for transformation. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to bring about transformation. Okay, so the Education Strategic Plan has the following cross-cutting. We have the learning outcomes, accountability, equity, and the guiding principles focus on access and equity, quality, relevance, efficiency and effectiveness, systems, capacity, sustainability, accountability, and of course, it should all lead to improved learning outcomes. I think we've talked about free senior high school, so I will not, but you can see the growth in high school enrollment as a result of the implementation of free senior high school. Beginning from 308,000 in 2016 to now projected 472,730 within a period of 2 years. And in terms of children with learning disability, we already have schools that were mainstream, and now we are mainstreaming. They've set up regional assessment centers, and we are seriously looking at how do you implement inclusive and balanced education policy that ensures that children from the rural areas are not disadvantaged, and they can also participate in the education process. Because as you read, the worst thing you can do to yourself is build the education system, spend a lot of money on it, and have the poor disadvantaged and put in some little corner. That's the worst thing you can do to yourself. So as we spend more money on education, we are ensuring that those who are less privileged, those who are disadvantaged, always have an opportunity to participate in the education system. We talk about innovation, inclusion, and some of the best practices. And actually, based on what we are seeing, I think we have an opportunity to really do more in Ghana. I walk into every classroom, you see disciplined students. And compared to my classrooms in South Los Angeles, where I had to spend 70% of my time managing classrooms and making sure the next day the children will sit in the right seats. I go to Ghana, you walk into a classroom, the children will all stand up and greet you. And I said, wow, this is heaven. Because when I was teaching in South LA, no, children don't stand up and greet you when you walk in. I remember my first day in the classroom, I walked in, said good morning, and nobody said good morning back. In Los Angeles, that was why I said, wow, this is going to be interesting. Because I had come from a system where you say good morning, and they stand up and say good morning back to you. And even sitting down, they won't say good morning back to me. But I survived. I saw an opportunity, and we're able to build schools in South Los Angeles together. And I go to Ghana and I tell them, this is heaven. We can do more. The children are thirsty, and they are hungry for education. And we are taking advantage of that to really create an environment that is transformative. And I think what has helped me a lot is I've become like an outsider. So whenever I see things, I see it through a different prism. Where people are seeing challenges, I said, no, this is a great opportunity for us. And together we can build a great education system. And when that system is created, that is when we're going to see the kind of learning outcomes we want. That is when we're going to see an improved gross tertiary enrollment ratio. And that is where we're going to see children who have the skill set to participate in the 21st century workforce and also work environment. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for the opportunity.